welcome to our Crazy Life Scotland and another craft and chat video. If you're new here, my name's Fiona, you're very welcome. And today I want to talk to you about UV resin. Now, I have had a few people approach me and ask if I would do a couple of videos on the basics of using resin, because in my Temu hauls I've been buying lots of moulds and inclusions and glitters and things like that for resin, and a few people have thought, oh, that looks quite interesting. So I did say that I would do like a very basic beginner's guide to resin. And in this video today, I'm going to talk about UV resin first. I am going to try to get through this without too much of that in the background. If you don't watch my other vlogs, we've just adopted a 9-month-old husky puppy called Hades, and he is causing havoc. He's brilliant, but he's just constantly on the go. So he's currently playing with our 2-year-old Caucasian Shepherd, and they are going out on a walk very soon, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to try and get this video filmed. Anyway, right, so the reason I'm going to talk about UV resin today is it's the resin I started with, and to me it's the easiest of the resins. Very quickly, I will talk about the differences between them. The main difference between them is, or the main differences between them are, UV resin comes in a black bottle and it is ready to go. You don't need to mix it with anything. You can either, you take the lid off and you can either squeeze it directly onto your project, or you can mix it with mica powder to colour it, or glitter, or that sort of thing. But it's basically ready to go. Whereas epoxy resin comes in 2 parts, and you basically, in order to activate it, to get it ready to make a project, you need to mix 2 parts together. And some of them, you have to mix them in a 1-to-1 ratio by volume. So for example, 30 mils of A and 30 mils of B, and then you have to give them a good stir before you're ready to actually start using them. Sometimes it's by weight, so 30 grams of A and 30 grams of B. I've never actually used any that are by weight. Some of them are 2-to-1, that sort of thing, but every kind of epoxy resin that I'm aware of, you need to mix together to activate it before you actually start your project. So UV resin's a lot easier in that respect. UV resin is also a lot quicker than epoxy resin, because UV resin, you use it in your project and then it's, as the name suggests, UV light cures it. And that can happen quite quickly depending on how much you've got. A minute to a minute and a half can cure, you know, just a small amount, and it will go up depending, but I'll talk about that later. Whereas epoxy resin depends on time and heat to cure. So quite often you need to wait 24 hours before you can demold it. So UV resin's more like an instant project, if you like. So that's the main advantages of UV resin over epoxy resin. However, there are some drawbacks as well. I don't think you can use alcohol inks in UV resin. I've not tried it, but I've seen a few videos that said don't do it, it won't cure. But you can use small amounts of powders to colour it, or glitters, that sort of thing. But if you use too much, it won't cure. Whereas your epoxy resin, you can add alcohol inks, you can add acrylic paint, you can add glitters, you can add anything to it, and it will still cure to a certain extent. If you've got too much, it won't. Also, bigger projects need epoxy resin. Small things like jewellery, earrings, key rings, things like that, UV resin is fine for, but anything bigger than that, if you've got something that's quite deep, if you are trying to use UV resin, you would need to do it a layer at a time, because you need to remember the UV light has to be able to penetrate it all to cure it. Whereas the epoxy resin, you do get different epoxies for different depths of pore. We'll talk about that in next week's video. That's them getting their harnesses on, they'll get excited, which is going to be about the basics of epoxy resin. So, what do you need to get started with UV resin? You basically need UV resin. Now, these are JDiction. If you saw my last couple of crafty videos, you'll know that I have worked closely with JDiction recently to give them like ideas and feedback about their products, and they did gift me some resin. These were gifted to me by JDiction. Now, when I first started UV resin, I just got a cheapo one off Amazon. I can't even remember what make it was, but I didn't know if I was going to like it or not, so I got a cheapo one. And I really enjoyed it, so that's when I really started looking into not the proper ones, but the more established resins that are on the market. And I have tried lots of different UV resins, and genuinely JDiction is my preferred one. It might not be yours or other people's, but it's definitely my preferred one. So that's what this is. Now, JDiction have got a normal UV resin, and they have also got a high viscosity UV resin. I don't know if any other companies have a high viscosity one or not. It's got its limitations, but it's also really good for some things, which I'll talk about later as well. So to get started, you need UV resin of some kind. It doesn't need to be, I will link the JDiction stuff in the description below, but it doesn't need to be that. You can get any. You also need a UV light of some description to cure the resin. Now, if you're in a very sunny country, it will cure in the sunshine because it's UV rays that the sun gives off, but it will take a wee while. Where we are in Scotland, we don't see the sun overly often, so I would be here for a week trying to get it to cure from the sun. So you can either get a nail lamp like this. So my first one again was off Amazon, and I just typed in UV nail lamp and I got one. This is actually a Temu one. This is my second one because I used it so much. And as you can see, there's UV lights inside. It's perfectly safe. It's not going to do you any damage. These are for nails. And most of them have got countdowns on the top. This one's got 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or 90 seconds. If you don't have a UV lamp, you can also use a UV torch. So again, this one was from Temu. This is really good if you're wanting to do tiny little areas or if you have to hold a bit and set it, because if you tried to put the lamp on, it would all just fall to bits. So it does have a lot of advantages, the little torch, but to be honest, I did UV resin for about a year before I got this. And the only reason I got it was I saw it on Temu, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go because it wasn't expensive at all. Again, I'll link these for you. So the other thing that you would want is something to protect your work surface. I started off, these are just heat trinket mats, silicone that I got off Amazon. You can use proper silicone mats as well. I've got some on my desk here, but definitely use something because my desk is an absolute mess because I was too eager to get started and didn't think about anything like that at all. That's the main things that you really need to get started, and you want something to put it in. So you can use, when you're just starting out, I would suggest that you use a silicone mould because that is the easiest thing. Now, when you're choosing a mould for UV resin, you want to choose one that is clear, that you can see through, because that way you know that the UV light is going to get through and you can actually turn it over and blast the UV light on it from that side as well. Whereas if you have got a mould like this, which is a lovely mould, but it's not going to cure properly if you use UV resin in it. The bit that's exposed to the light will, and if it's completely clear, you might be lucky, it might cure right through, but if you've got anything in it at all, it won't cure the bottom and you can't turn it over because the UV rays won't get through. So this type of mould is good for epoxy resin, but not so much for UV. UV resin, you want a mould like this. You also want a mould that's not too deep. As I was saying, the epoxy resin will cure if it's quite deep, but because you're relying on the UV rays, the UV resin you're better to do in sort of smaller depths. If you do want to use a deeper one, I would do it in small layers, like do a small layer, cure it, and then another layer and cure it. But for anything really deep or big, you're best to use epoxy resin. For bigger projects, you can use UV resin, but you would use a lot of it. And to be honest, it's a bit fiddly. So yes, a mould is the best thing. You can use what's called open back bezels. I think I've got some, hold on. And these were from Temu. if you're doing resin, if you're starting with resin, I would highly advise you to go onto Temu, because the moulds and the things that you can pick up are a brilliant price. So this is an open back bezel. As you can see, there's nothing in it, and I can poke my finger right through it, but this would make a lovely necklace. How do you stop the resin going right through though? You use a resin tape. What I will do once I've finished havering to you about it all is I will show you an example of using UV resin, but I'm going to use a mould rather than these. But basically what you would do with this is you would stick it to something very sticky. You do get, this is proper resin tape, but I also use the transfer tape that I've got for transferring vinyl from my Cricut mat onto a project, so you can use that sort of thing. I'm not sure if you could use the likes of painter's tape, masking tape, possibly. I've not tried it, but that is what you would do with these. I'm not going to do any of these today because it's slightly more advanced than the level that I'm aiming this video at, but I certainly wouldn't mind doing a tutorial using these if anybody is interested. So that is the basics that you actually need to get started. The resin, some kind of light to cure it, something to work on, a silicone mat or something, a mould, and you're ready to go. Bob's your uncle. Extras that can help to make your project either easier or better is some sort of mirror. This is a mirror tile that I got from Temu. I got a huge pack of them. It's actually cardboard, it's not glass. But the good thing about these is if you sit your mould on that when the resin is curing, the rays can go right through to the mirror and bounce back up. So you're basically curing both sides at the one time. I would still turn it over and give it a proper blast from there, but it definitely does help to cure it a little bit quicker. You don't need to have it. I didn't have it for about the first year, and then I thought, do you know what, I'm going to try it because I saw a few people on YouTube doing it, and it definitely does make a difference. Other things that are nice to have for doing UV resin are mica powders. Now these are basically, it's powders that are used to colour resin. I think all of these were from JDiction as well, but they come in all different colours and you just need a tiny amount of them to colour your resin, especially your UV. You don't want to make it totally opaque because it's harder to cure that way. So they are really good. Also nail powders can be used. These are nail powders that I got from Temu and they're gorgeous colours. They work fine in the UV resin. I have done it before. And the glitters, woo, we love glitter. If you're a crafter, you've probably got lots of glitter anyway, but just any sort of normal glitter is fine. You just pop that in, mix it in. And the good thing about glitter is the resin's usually still clear, so it cures better and quicker than the mica powder. Like I said earlier, I don't think alcohol ink works. I've not tried it, but I've seen a few people saying don't. So I've just stayed away from it. Oh, I've just remembered something else that you need. Silly me, I should have written a list, but I just wing it, you know what I'm like. Something else that you need is some kind of tool for mixing. You can use like lollipop sticks. So if you're wanting to mix your UV resin in with some colour, you just basically use a lollipop stick. But also, it's worthwhile getting some sort of silicone container that you can mix it with. Now, I originally used what I had in the cupboard, which was silicone cupcake liner things. And basically they're good because you can turn it out to outside in to clean it out when you're finished. So anything like that is good. If you don't have anything like that, whatever you've got is fine. Even if you're working on a silicone mat, you can put a wee bit on the silicone mat and mix your colour in there. That's not a problem. But the other thing that's good to have is something to transfer it from wherever you've mixed it into your mould. So things like, these are nail art tools. So they've got little dots on the end. This one's got a little silicone tip as well, so you can brush it in or you can just dot it in. This is a smaller dot. You can also use cotton buds, but they do tend to sort of absorb the resin. You can use little microfiber brushes as well, although I usually use these more for cleaning up than actually transferring in, but you can. So anything that's got a small tip on it, you can use. Like I said, you can pour it directly from your bottle. And of course, the reason it's in a black bottle is because if it was sitting in sunshine, it would cure if it was a see-through bottle. So that is the very basics of UV resin. What I want to do now, it's much easier to actually see what I'm talking about than just listen to me blathering on. I've just thought of another couple of things that are handy to have. Again, you don't need to have, but it's handy to have. One is a long neck candle lighter for popping any surface bubbles, but you need to be careful not to go too near your mould because you can melt your mould. You just want to give it a wee bit, just put the heat over it gently. You can use a heat gun, but I make a mess when I do that. You can also use cocktail sticks or toothpicks to get rid of any little bubbles, but be careful with these because they will scratch your mould. And the other thing you can use if you've not got any of them is some alcohol, not gin, isopropyl alcohol, and just put it in a squishy bottle and you can squish the top of your resin and that tends to get rid of bubbles as well. Gloves, safety aspect of UV resin, it's a lot safer than epoxy resin. I don't tend to wear gloves when I'm using it because I've got small hands, the gloves are always too big, and it's usually small areas that I'm working with the UV resin, and it's just a nightmare. And to be honest, I don't tend to get it on my fingers anyway. So I personally don't wear gloves, but I would advise you to wear gloves if you can. Just keep yourself safe. You don't need to wear a mask or anything like that with UV resin. It's not toxic, but I would suggest that if you're in a room with a window, maybe open the window, just keep it well ventilated to be on the safe side. I think I've finally got everything that you need. I was thinking to myself earlier, yeah, you just need your resin, your lamp, and that's you ready to go. But it's not until you actually start thinking about doing a project that you're like, oh, actually, I need one of them. Oh, and I use one of them. Anyway, I'm going to turn you around and we're going to get started. Right, so as an example today, I'm just going to do something very simple. I'm going to do this little pendant mould, and I will show you how to mix different things in with it. So, got my UV resin. Just going to put a squeeze in there. I put quite a bit in just now because I'm going to put just normal UV resin in without mixing it with any colours first, just so that you can see the difference. And I'm just scooping some up with this little tool. And you want to make sure, if it's got a wee knobbly bit, I don't know what the wee knobbly bits are called, if it's got one of them, you want to make sure that it gets right in behind it. Now sometimes UV resin shrinks a little bit when it's cured. Right, so if you're doing, I'm going to do this in sort of multicolours. So what I would suggest is doing one bit at a time, curing it, and then another bit, curing it. And this is just the normal UV resin that I'm using just now. It's not the high viscosity one. So I put a little bit there. Now there's a couple of little bubbles. So what I'm going to do is just take my long neck lighter, give it a little squish over like that. And that should get rid of any bubbles. If there's still some left, you can use a cocktail stick, just be very careful not to scratch your mould. But sometimes, if you leave it long enough, the bubbles will normally come up to the surface, but I get impatient. Right, so I'm going to use my lamp, put the lamp over that, and always put your lid back on your UV resin, because if you leave the lid off, any UV resin that's on the top could start to cure if it's very sunny. Right, so I've still got some UV resin in here, so I'm going to use, I think I'll use a nail powder first. I'm going to use this gold colour. I'm going to take a lolly stick, and we don't want too much in it because we don't want it to go totally opaque. You can always add more if you've not got enough, but you can't take away. So start with less and then add it if you need it. So that's a lovely sort of goldy shimmery colour now, ready for when. Now you don't need to do a complete cure in between colours, just as long as it's sort of touch dry, and that way they're not all going to mix into each other and make a mucky puddle mess. Puppies are back from their walks. I apologise if you hear noises. And I've also realised I forgot to put my mirror underneath, so I'm going to do that just now. Again, it just helps it to cure quicker because it's curing from the bottom as well. Right, so I don't need to wipe this because it was just clear resin that I was using. So I'm just going to take some on my little silicone end. Now, if you don't use all of a particular colour, you can actually keep it in darkness and it will still stay liquid as long as there's no UV light coming to it. So you don't need to waste it. Right, so I've just put another little layer there. I'm going to pop that on. And when I'm doing UV resin, I do tend to try to use a small container because I'm just using a little bit at a time. But I'm not going to use this colour again, so while that is curing, I'm going to use this to cure that so I can take it out and keep it. You could just use alcohol and wipes and clean it out, but I like to not waste any resin. So if I'm not going to use any leftovers in a different mould, I will cure it and keep it. I'll show you in a wee second. Right, so that has had 90 seconds and I was using the torch on this for the same amount of time, and hopefully, look at that. It'll still be sticky on that side because it's not cured from the bottom yet. I will just pop it on there, and then when the lamp goes over it again, it will cure that side. And any wet resin, just give it a wee wipe. There we go. So we're ready to go into a different colour now. So I'm going to put some more resin in here. And this time I'm going to use a glitter, I think. There's so many different things that you can put in resin. It's so much fun playing with it all. So I'm just going to put a small amount of gold glitter in. I'll wipe my stick. Use the dry bit of the stick to pop it in. There we go. Give it a stir around. And you'll see it does go a bit thicker when you add the likes of glitter into it, so always take that into account. It may take longer to cure as well. So I'm just going to scoop it up with a stick since I've got that there. Pop it on there. Take my little tool. Right, and I just want to take it right up to the edge of the other colour, so excuse them playing, so that it sort of merges in. So I'm going to pop the UV light on, and there's a tiny little bit there that again I'm going to cure because I need to close my glitter as I go or else I knock them over everywhere. I keep a little tub with all the little odds and ends of resin that I've used because you just never know when they're going to be useful for something. I mean, look, that one looks a bit like a moon. So I never waste my resin. If I'm not using it, I cure it. Okay, that's had 90 seconds. And I'll pop this bit out. Again, it's still a bit sticky on the other side, so I'll just pop that there. And I'll give this a wipe. At this stage, it doesn't need alcohol or anything. It just wipes off with a baby wipe. And I'm not too concerned if there's still bits of glitter in there just now, because it's the same piece that I'm working on anyway. Right, now I am going to try it with some mica powder. Always make sure you dry whatever container you're using as well, because resin doesn't like water. So like I said earlier, I'm not wearing gloves, but you might want to keep yourself safe. This one I am going to use some mica powder. And I'll stick with a sort of bronzy gold theme, I think. I will use, that one looks quite nice. What's this? Royal Gold. I'm going to wipe my stick, clean my little tool. And mica powder is very, very strongly pigmented, or at least this one is. So again, you don't need too much. If you put too much in, it won't cure properly. So if you do accidentally put too much in, you can't take it away, but you can add resin to sort of dilute it down a bit. I might add just a little bit of resin to this because there's not a lot there. Again, easier to add than to take away. Please excuse the dogs playing. Right, that's quite a nice consistency. So I'm going to fill the bottom part up with this. And if you are doing different colours, you want to try to get them all roughly the same depth, but we're going to make sure it's all even in a second anyway. And you might want to move your mould around just to make sure that you're in all the edges. Again, I'm just going to try to mix it together with that little glittery layer. Right, that looks fine. I can't see any bubbles, but I'll give it a wee heat up anyway, just in case. Oh, there was one there. Okay, so that's had 90 seconds and I have cleaned my little tub out just in the same way. And I'm going to put another layer over all of it. And this time I'm going to put some of this gold foil into the resin. It's just to give you an idea of different things that you can add. Pop my resin in there. Again, it will thicken up when you add the foil to it. And the foil, you just really need a wee bit because you can break it up. You just want to tear it to bits, basically. Pop it in. That should be enough. Things like this you can get anywhere. Temu is, I know I say it all the time, and I will leave my affiliate link to Temu in the description box, but the reason I say it all the time is because it's just absolutely amazing value. You can get pretty much anything that you need for doing resin, including resin, but I've not tried it. And the prices are just amazing. What I will say is it's worth looking under nail art as well as resin, because a lot of nail art equipment and glitters and stickers and things like that can be really good for resin, and it's usually less expensive if you look under nail art than resin. You know, I think companies are realising that resin's a big thing just now. So I'm going to put this up even round where the clear bit is. So yeah, they're charging a premium for using the word resin, but if you just look under nail art, you will get a lot of these tools, stickers, glitters, powders, anything like that. Right, so again, I'm not placing the foils in any specific area. I'm just going around it all. Make sure that you get into all of the corners with your resin. Going to pop the lamp on for 90 seconds. Now, this is the last layer that I'm doing in the mould. I will finish it off out of the mould, but the reason I'm saying that is, even though we've had the mirror underneath it, once it has cured on top, we're going to flip the mould over to make sure it's definitely cured at the bottom. Right, so I actually gave it 2 lots of 90 seconds that time because it's the last layer that's been done, and I'm going to flip it over and put this back on for another 2 lots of 90 seconds. Right, I'm sorry if the angle's changed. I was putting things away and I've knocked you with my wheelchair. So, let's have a look now. So it does shrink slightly, okay, and it doesn't look like it's very thick at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the high viscosity resin, UV resin, just to put an extra layer on top, just to make sure it's got a nice thick layer, because it has shrunk quite a bit. I'm going to use the JDiction high viscosity resin, and I'm going to put quite a generous amount in, and I'm going to let it, resin generally is self-leveling, so if you leave it long enough it will level out itself. Now this is a relatively thick layer that I'm putting on just now, so I will give it a few minutes under the lamp. And I'm going to take my tool just to make sure that it's definitely getting in behind all the little knobbly bit and into all of the corners. You can also sort of lift it up to eye level to check that you've definitely got it all level, or put your eyes down to its level. Just don't stick your nose in it, which is definitely a hazard if you've got a nose like mine. I think I need a little bit more. Once it's out of the mould you get a better idea. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cure that and then add some more if it needs it. Okay, that's had 2 lots of 90 seconds. Now what I'm going to do now is unmould it. Right, so if I hold it right up like that, you can see, because the mould hasn't been filled to the top, there is a bit of a void there, but it's easier to see when it's out of the mould. So that is one side and that is the other. How nice is that? So that's going to be our main side, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just very gently, because it's still quite soft, I can take my scissors and just gently take off the edges. Now these are round ones, they're not very good. My daughter keeps disappearing with my scissors. I'll do what I can with this. You do get what's called a deburring tool, which is a bit like a sort of, it's like a blade but not as sharp. And it's good for taking off edges like this. But as a beginner, you're not likely to have anything like that. So I'm just going to go with what you're likely to have, which is scissors. So that's most of the rough edges off. You can sand it as well. You can just get some sandpaper or a nail file and just buff it down at the edges. So I want it a wee bit tidier at the back. That's going to be the front. So to make it a bit tidier at the back, I'm just going to add some more UV resin where the holes are. Not the holes, the dips. And again, I'm going to use the high viscosity one. If you don't have high viscosity resin, you can just use the normal UV resin. So this isn't cured yet, but you can see that's definitely helping it to level off a bit. So I'm going to cure this. Right, so that's had 90 seconds twice. Ignore these, it's other projects that I'm working on. And it's definitely touch dry. So I can carry on working on that off camera. That's just the back anyway. In fact, hold on. I'm just going to take this no drama llama nail file and just gently, because it's still quite soft, I should be able to just gently sand the edges. These aren't the best nail files in the world. Take a baby wipe. So it's not perfect, but it's better than it was. I can fix that off camera. So look at that. How nice is that? I'm going to give it just a wee quick wipe. Ooh, that is looking absolutely lovely. And then just to give it more of a shine, you can do what they call doming. So that is putting a layer of resin, usually UV resin, over the top just to make it nice and shiny and give it a nice finish. So that's where the high viscosity resin is fab, because it pretty much stays where you put it. So what a lot of people do is they put the resin in the middle and then they slowly brush it out. I like to do it the other way. I can't remember who it was on YouTube doing it the other way, and it seemed to work better for me. So it's up to you. You can try both ways. So basically I'm just going to put a layer of UV resin right round the edge, the high viscosity one. Remember, you've got a little hole there. Now, it shouldn't fall off the edges because the surface tension of the resin stops it from doing so. But if you've got a very sharp edge, or if you go over the edge slightly, then you might get a little bit of spillage. So I'm just taking my little silicone dotty thing and making sure it's going right to the edges but not quite over, and that should give it a nice finish. If you do accidentally fill in the little hole, you can just poke it out with something sharp or sand it out, whatever, drill it out. Right, I'm going to put my head down just to see how it is roughly. I need another little bit in there. I can see a little dip. So anywhere you can see a little dip, just add a touch more resin. I'm not an expert at doming yet. I've not done it an awful lot, but that's looking not too bad. So I'm going to put my UV lamp on probably for 3 minutes just to make sure that it's definitely cured, and I shall come back to you. Okay, that's had 3 lots. Let's have a look and see. Yep, that is dry. And there is our piece. You can see that it's nice and rounded now, the dome. I do still need to work on the back, but that's fine. I can do that off camera. But basically what you can then do is put either a chain or cord through there to make it a pendant, or you can put a keyring attachment on it to make it a keyring. But I'm sure you'll agree that is a very elegant looking piece. It looks very fancy, and it was a beginner level. So even if you've never used UV resin before, you can still make some really nice pieces. And you're not limited really to what you put in it. Don't put alcohol ink in. But if you've got any glitter lying about, if you've got eyeshadow that you don't use anymore, break that up and put that in instead of mica powder. The only limit is your imagination, really. And not every piece will go right. This isn't perfect, but I made it and I'm happy with it. I wouldn't sell it, but I would wear it myself. So that is what it takes to get started with UV resin. You don't need a lot of equipment as long as you've got the resin, a nail lamp or UV torch, some tools to work with, a mould. You can get started. Give it a go. It's so easy. Just try out different things. It's relatively expensive, but if you get, Temu or Amazon's own UV resin to start with, to have a play about with, you're not really wasting money if it doesn't turn out. So please give it a go. If there's any questions, just ask in the comments below. If there's anything that I've not covered, then I'm more than happy to do so. And if you want me to do any sort of more advanced UV projects, like with the, sorry about the dogs, the open back bezels or anything like that, again, just let me know. So next week I'm going to delve into the realms of epoxy resin, but this is just a little insight into UV resin first. So if you've enjoyed this and you want to see more about epoxy resin, please do subscribe and hit the bell notification so you get notified when I upload that video. It will hopefully be next Wednesday. doggies permitting. See what I mean? So yeah, if you've enjoyed this, please hit the thumbs up button, talk to me in the comments below, and I will see you in our next one. Thanks everyone, bye!